She was 7 years old, sitting alone on a dark curb at 11 at night, holding a rabbit with one missing button eye and crying the kind of tears that mean you've stopped expecting anyone to show up. The street was empty. The houses were dark. No one was coming. That's when she heard it. Not a car, not a voice. Something she had never heard before. A sound that started at the edge of the world and grew until it filled everything. The roar of 300 engines rolling out of the dark like thunder that had chosen to arrive low and slow and deliberate. And one man stepped off his bike and sat down beside her. The night in Millbrook, Tennessee settled like a heavy wool blanket over everything it touched. The cracked sidewalks, the darkened storefronts along Main Street, the old water tower that still bore the faded name of a hardware store that had closed before most people could remember. It was the kind of small town where everybody claimed to know everybody, where front porches were occupied until the fireflies came out, and where strangers were measured the moment they crossed the city limits sign. On the corner of Maple Street and Route 9, beneath a busted street lamp that flickered with the inconsistency of a dying heartbeat, a little girl sat alone on the curb. Her name was Lily Harmon. She was 7 years old. She wore a yellow cotton dress that had once been bright, but was now faded to the color of old paper, and her brown hair, fine as spider silk, clung to the sides of her damp face. She wasn't wailing. She wasn't throwing a tantrum the way children sometimes do when they want something. She was doing something far quieter and far more heartbreaking. She was crying the way people cry when they've stopped expecting anyone to come. Her green eyes stared at nothing in particular. A worn stuffed rabbit, its left ear nearly detached, its button eye scratched to a dull grey, sat in her lap, clutched between both hands as though it were the only solid thing left in the world. The street was empty. A gas station 3 blocks away threw a pale orange light toward the sky, but nothing moved beneath it. The summer air was thick and warm, heavy with the smell of cut grass and something faintly metallic from the old rail yard on the edge of town. Crickets filled the silence with their mechanical song. It was 10:47 p.m. Lily had been sitting there for over an hour. She had counted the cracks in the concrete. She had watched 2 cars pass without slowing. She had folded and unfolded the hem of her dress until the fabric began to fray. And through all of it, she had not moved, because her mother had told her once, during a night very much like this one, that when you don't know where to go, you stay where you are. You stay and you wait, and you trust that someone will come. Her mother's name was Janet, and Janet had not come. Lily pressed her rabbit tighter and whispered his name, Benny, just to hear something that felt like home. 3 blocks east, at the junction of Route 9 and the old state highway, a different kind of night was unfolding. Marcus Reed downshifted his Harley-Davidson Road King as Millbrook's town limit sign blurred past him in the dark. He felt the engine's vibration travel up through the handlebars and into his palms, the way it always did, like a second heartbeat, steady and certain. 48 years old, 6'2", with a grey-streaked beard that had grown longer every winter for the past decade, and arms sleeved in tattoos that told the story of a life lived hard and without apology. Marcus Reed was not the kind of man that small towns welcomed with open arms. He knew this. He had always known this. Behind him, stretching back along Route 9 like a river of chrome and thunder, came the rest of them, the Iron Ridge Riders, a motorcycle club with chapters in 6 states, founded 31 years ago by Marcus's father, Gerald Reed, who had believed that men who had nothing else in common could still be brothers if they chose to be. Tonight, all 312 members of the Tennessee Regional Chapter were riding together for the first time in 4 years, making their way to the annual rally in Cookeville. Millbrook was simply a town they needed to pass through. Marcus had ridden through 100 towns like Millbrook. He knew the script by heart, the curtains that shifted in windows, the hands that reached for phones, the police cruisers that materialized from nowhere. The looks on faces that said, "Keep moving, you don't belong here." He had learned years ago not to let it cut him. He was thinking about the route, about whether to take the bypass or stay on Main, when his headlight caught something on the side of the road, a flash of yellow, something small. He slowed instinctively, his boot dragging against the asphalt, and then he saw her clearly. A tiny girl, sitting alone on the curb, her face tilted down, her shoulders trembling with the quiet earthquake of tears. Marcus brought the Road King to a full stop. Behind him, the column of bikes slowed and then stopped too. 300 machines falling silent one after another, like dominoes laid down gently, until the only sound was the cooling tick of engines and the unending chorus of crickets. Marcus swung off his bike and pulled off his helmet. He stood for a moment in the dark, looking at the girl. In 31 years of riding, he had seen a great many things on the sides of roads. None of them had stopped him quite like this. He walked toward her slowly, the way you walk toward something fragile. "Hey," he said, his voice low, the Tennessee drawl soft and deliberate. "Hey, little one." Lily looked up. Her green eyes, red-rimmed and wet, found his face, the beard, the tattoos, the leather vest with its patches and insignia, and for 1 second, something that might have been fear moved across her features. Then it passed. Maybe it was the way he had crouched down to her level. Maybe it was the gentleness in his voice. Maybe it was simply that she had been alone long enough that even a stranger felt like relief. "I can't find my mama," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Marcus sat down on the curb beside her, not standing over her, not looming, just sitting, the way you sit beside someone who needs company more than they need answers. "Okay," he said, "we're going to find her." It was, in that moment, the most natural thing in the world to say. The sight of 300 motorcycles parked along Maple Street was not something Millbrook had seen before, and the town reacted the way small places react to things they haven't seen before, with a mixture of alarm and the particular kind of indignation that comes from feeling that the natural order has been disrupted. Within 15 minutes of Marcus Reed sitting down on that curb, lights had come on in houses along the block. By 20 minutes, 3 residents had called the Millbrook Police Department, and by the time Deputy Carl Whitmore arrived in his cruiser, lights on, no siren, because he wasn't sure yet what he was dealing with, a solid column of bikes occupied every inch of parking along both sides of the street. Whitmore was a lean man of 53, with a face like tanned leather, and the permanent squint of someone who had spent too many years looking into the Tennessee sun. He had been with the department for 26 years, and in those 26 years he had developed a reliable instinct for trouble. 300 bikers in Millbrook at 11 at night registered high on that instinct. He stepped out of the cruiser and surveyed the scene. What he saw was not what he expected. The bikers, and there were indeed an extraordinary number of them, lined up along the street with a discipline that struck him as almost military, were not causing any disturbance. They were standing or sitting beside their machines, talking quietly among themselves. Several had removed their helmets, a few were drinking from water bottles. None of them appeared to be drunk, aggressive, or in any way threatening. At the center of this, on the curb, sat Marcus Reed with the little girl. Marcus had learned her full name, Lily Harmon. He had learned that she lived at 412 Cedar Lane, 4 blocks west and 2 south. He had learned that her mother's name was Janet, that Janet worked the evening shift at the Millbrook Diner, and that tonight, for reasons Lily could not fully articulate, Janet had not come home when she was supposed to. Lily had been left in the care of a neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Delvey, while Janet worked, but Mrs. Delvey had suffered a health episode sometime around 9 o'clock and had been taken away in an ambulance. In the confusion, no one had thought to call anyone about Lily, and Lily, waking to find herself alone in Mrs. Delvy's house, had done the only thing a 7-year-old with her particular brand of stubborn hopefulness could think to do. She had walked to the last place she remembered waiting for her mother and sat down to wait again. Marcus had gotten this story in fragments, patient and unhurried, asking only the questions that needed asking and waiting through the silences without filling them. Beside him now sat Tommy Briggs, 26 years old, the youngest officer of the Iron Ridge Riders, with close-cropped red hair and a face that still carried the openness of someone who hadn't yet learned to close himself off from the world. Tommy had been the first one off his bike after Marcus, and he had wordlessly settled himself on Lily's other side, producing from his jacket pocket a slightly squashed granola bar and offering it to her with the earnestness of someone making a formal gift. Lily had accepted it with both hands, the way children accept things that matter. Now Whitmore approached, and Marcus rose to meet him. The two men faced each other across the invisible line that existed between them, the man with the badge and the man with the leather vest, and both of them were aware of it. "Evening," Marcus said. Whitmore looked past him at Lily. "That child, she lost. Her name's Lily Harmon, mother's Janet Harmon, works at the diner. Little girl got left alone when a neighbor had a medical emergency. She's fine. Not hurt." Marcus paused. "We're trying to locate the mother." Whitmore studied him. "You're trying to locate her?" "That's what I said." Something shifted in Whitmore's expression. Not warmth exactly, but the recalibration of a man who had arrived expecting one situation and found another. He looked at the rows of bikes. He looked at the men standing quietly beside them. He looked at Lily, who was eating her granola bar and watching the two adults with the focused attention of someone following a tennis match. "The mother have a phone?" Whitmore asked. "Girl doesn't know the number by heart," Marcus said. "She's 7. Whitmore absorbed this. He reached for his radio. While the deputy made his calls, a shift was beginning along Maple Street that no one had quite planned. Word had moved through the Iron Ridge Riders, the way word moves through any group of people who have ridden together long enough to operate like a single organism. There was a child. She was alone. She needed help. That was all. No vote was taken. No order was given. Riders, who had been planning to continue to Cookville by midnight, found themselves, without quite deciding to, staying where they were. 2 men had already walked the 4 blocks to Cedar Lane to check Janet Harmon's address. Another had ridden to the diner to ask about her. 3 more were positioned at the far ends of the block. Not aggressively, not making any kind of statement, simply present and watching. In the windows of the houses on Maple Street, the curtains were still pulled back. The people watching from those windows could not hear the conversations. They could not know that Tommy was now teaching Lily a hand-clapping game she had apparently never learned. They could not hear Marcus's low, measured voice as he answered Whitmore's questions with the patience of a man who had answered suspicious questions before and had nothing to hide. What they saw was leather and metal and size and ink. What they saw was what they had always seen when they looked at men like Marcus Reed. They saw what they expected to see, and they were wrong. By midnight, the situation had developed a complexity that Deputy Whitmore had not anticipated when he pulled onto Maple Street an hour earlier. Janet Harmon had not been located. The diner confirmed she had clocked out at 9:15 p.m. Earlier than usual, the manager said, because she had received a phone call that visibly upset her. She had left without saying where she was going. Her car, a 2009 blue Honda Civic with a cracked rear taillight, was not parked at her home address or at the diner or at any of the other locations Whitmore had checked. Mrs. Delvey, Lily's neighbor, was at Millbrook General, stable but sedated. She had no immediate family in town. And so Lily Harmon remained, technically, a found child with no available guardian. in the company of 300 motorcycle club members on a dark street in a town that increasingly wanted them gone. Whitmore had called his supervisor, Sheriff Dale Bowen, who arrived at 12:20 a.m. in civilian clothes with the particular expression of a man who feels that his sleep has been disturbed for reasons that could have been avoided by better judgment on someone's part. Bowen was 61, heavy-set, with the kind of authority that comes not from physical presence, but from the absolute certainty that he was right about things. He had been sheriff of Millbrook County for 14 years. He had won his last 2 elections unopposed. He took one look at the scene, the child on the curb, the bikers, Whitmore standing in the middle looking uncertain, and made his assessment in approximately 4 seconds. "How long have they been here?" he asked Whitmore. "About an hour and a half, sir." "Who told them they could park here?" "Nobody, but they're not causing any—" "I didn't ask if they were causing anything," Bowen said. "I asked who gave them permission." He walked toward Marcus Reed with the stride of a man approaching a problem that needed to be resolved. Marcus had been watching him come. He had met Dale Bowens before, not this specific man, but the type, the set of the jaw, the angle of approach. The eyes that had already finished the conversation before it began. He stood up slowly and waited. "You the leader of this group?" Bowen asked. "I'm the chapter president, Marcus Reed." "Mr. Reed." Bowen's use of the name managed to be both correct and dismissive. "I appreciate that you may have had good intentions stopping for the child, but the situation is now in the hands of law enforcement. I'm going to need your group to clear this street." "With respect, Sheriff, we'd like to make sure the girl is settled before we move on. The girl will be placed in the care of social services, pending location of her mother. That's the appropriate process." Bowen's voice was flat, factual, final. "What's not appropriate is 300 bikers on a residential street at midnight." "We're not camping," Marcus said. "We're parked." Something tightened in Bowen's expression. "Mr. Reed." "She's scared," Marcus said quietly. "She just spent over an hour alone in the dark, and now you want to hand her to a stranger while we ride away. I'm not saying that's wrong procedure. I'm saying maybe procedure could wait 20 minutes. Bowen stared at him. The street was very quiet. Somewhere down the block a dog was barking. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Bowen said, his voice dropping half a register. "Move your group." Tommy Briggs, still sitting beside Lily, had watched this exchange with the particular alertness of someone young enough to still feel injustice as a physical sensation. He glanced at Marcus. Marcus, without turning, gave the smallest possible shake of his head. Not now. Tommy looked back at Lily. She was watching the 2 men with those wide green eyes, and he could see in her face the moment she understood that something was wrong, that the grown-ups were arguing about her, and that whatever happened next was out of her hands. "Hey," Tommy said quietly, drawing her attention back to him. "What's Benny's favorite color?" Lily looked at the rabbit in her lap. She considered this with the gravity it deserved. "Blue," she said finally. "Like the sky when it's really, really blue." "That's a good answer," Tommy said. Marcus and Bowen were still facing each other. Then a voice from the far end of the block, one of the riders posted as a lookout, called out in a tone that was careful and controlled. "Marcus, blue Civic, Cedar Lane, coming around the corner." Everyone turned. A 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked rear taillight had turned onto Maple Street. It was moving slowly, as though the person driving it wasn't sure if this was the right place. As though she was looking for something. The car stopped, the door opened, a woman got out. She was 31 years old, with Lily's same brown hair and something in her face that was equal parts exhaustion and terror. She looked at the rows of bikes. She looked at the police cruiser. She looked at the deputy and the sheriff and Marcus Reed standing in the middle of the road. And then her eyes found the small yellow figure on the curb. "Lily?" Lily was off the curb before anyone had time to react, flying down the sidewalk with Benny clutched to her chest. And when she hit her mother, she hit her with the full-body force of 7 years of loving someone completely. Janet Harmon dropped to her knees on the asphalt and held her daughter, and for a moment the whole street was still. Marcus Reed looked at Sheriff Bowen. Bowen looked at the woman and the child. Something moved across the sheriff's face that he did not let become anything visible. He cleared his throat. He adjusted his jacket. "Well," he said, to no one in particular. The reunion lasted only a moment before the procedural machinery of law enforcement reasserted itself. Whitmore guided Janet Harmon to his cruiser, gently, with a courtesy that Marcus noted, while Sheriff Bowen stood at a small distance observing. Lily would not let go of her mother's hand, and no one suggested she should. It came out in pieces over the next 40 minutes, there on Maple Street, while the Iron Ridge riders waited with a patience that seemed to confound the sheriff. Janet Harmon had received a call at the diner from Ray Dunn, her ex-boyfriend of 8 months, a man she had left in April after a relationship that had grown, gradually and then all at once, into something she was afraid of. Ray had been calling for weeks. She had blocked his number 3 times. He had a habit of showing up at places she was supposed to be. Tonight, Ray had called from a borrowed phone. He had told her he was outside her house, outside the house where Lily was sleeping at the neighbors, except Janet hadn't known yet that Mrs. Delvey had been taken to the hospital. She had left the diner immediately, driven to the east side of town, where Ray had once had a friend's apartment, trying to keep him away from her address. She had spent nearly 2 hours driving in careful circles, making calls to a cousin in Nashville who wasn't picking up, trying to figure out how to handle a situation that the police, she had come to believe, would not take seriously enough to help her. She had come back to find her street full of motorcycles and her daughter on the curb. "I didn't know," she said, and the words were cracked open with the specific kind of guilt that belongs to parents. "I thought she was asleep at Ruth's." "She's okay," Whitmore said. "She wasn't harmed. She was alone in the dark for over an hour. She was in the company of—" Whitmore paused. He glanced toward Marcus. He chose his words deliberately. "She was looked after." Sheriff Bowen had been listening from 3 feet away. His arms were crossed. His expression was the careful, neutral expression of a man processing a situation in which his initial instincts had proven partially incorrect, deciding how much to acknowledge this. Marcus had given his account when asked. He had been concise and factual. He had not made any point of being concise and factual. He had simply been. Now Bowen approached him directly, not with the same adversarial stride as before. Differently, with a more measured step. "You have a record, Mr. Reed?" he asked. "A DUI in 1999, Marcus said. "Nothing since." Bowen looked at him. "You rode from where tonight?" "Knoxville, heading to the rally in Cookville. 300 of you." 312, technically. A pause. Bowen looked at the rows of bikes, at the men standing quietly beside them, some sitting on curbs of their own now, some talking, one group that had produced sandwiches from somewhere and were eating with the ease of people entirely comfortable with an unexpected delay. "You always travel like this?" Bowen asked. There was something different in the question. Not friendly exactly, but not hostile. "Iron Ridge started as a veterans club," Marcus said. "My father founded it in 1994. About 60% of our members are former military. We ride together once a year, the whole chapter. It's a tradition." Bowen absorbed this. "The young one," he said, with a movement of his chin toward Tommy, who was still sitting with Lily and Janet. "He's one of yours?" "Tommy Briggs, 26, Marines, 2 tours. He's my best rider." Bowen said nothing for a moment. Then, "What made you stop?" "Tonight, you could have kept going." Marcus looked at him. The question was genuine, which was the only reason he answered it honestly. "She was 7 years old and crying alone in the dark," he said. "There was nothing that was going to make me ride past that." The sheriff was quiet for a long time. Meanwhile, near the cruiser, something was happening that would have surprised the people still watching from their windows. Janet Harmon, with Lily pressed against her side, had looked up at Tommy Briggs and said, in a voice that was trying very hard to be steady, "She wouldn't stop talking about you. On the way over here, she told me you knew a clapping game." Tommy's face, young, open, still undefended against the world, did something complicated. "She caught on fast," he said. "She's smart." "She is," Janet said, and then, "Thank you for sitting with her." Tommy nodded. He looked at his hands. "She reminded me of my sister," he said quietly. "When my sister was little." He paused. "She's good. Your daughter, she's really good." It was not an elegant speech. It was the kind of thing said by someone who means it entirely and has no particular skill at expressing it entirely. But Janet Harmon understood it perfectly. She reached out and touched Tommy's forearm, the one with the tattoo that read Semper Fi in lettering that meant it would never come off. And she said, "I know she was safe." I could see it in her face. The street, for one moment, was very quiet. Then Ray Dunn's truck turned onto Maple Street. He had clearly not seen before turning. What was there? The truck rolled forward 20 feet before it stopped. Through the windshield, in the pale light, Marcus could see the shape of a man registering one by one: the police cruiser, the 300 motorcycles, the sheriff, the deputy, and Janet Harmon standing in the middle of all of it. Ray Dunn put his truck in reverse. Whitmore was at his cruiser door before the truck had completed its first backward yard. "Tennessee plates," Marcus said, quietly enough that only Bowen heard him. "Dark green Ram pickup, if that's who I think it is." Bowen looked at him sharply. Marcus nodded toward Janet, who had gone very still, her arm pulled tight around Lily, watching the truck. The sheriff made a decision. He gave Whitmore a single, clear gesture. Whitmore blocked the truck. Ray Dunn was detained, not arrested, not yet, but brought out of his truck on a quiet stretch of Maple Street while his license and registration were examined with a thoroughness that suggested Deputy Whitmore was in no particular hurry. Janet, coached calmly by Whitmore, formally requested a report be filed. It was a beginning, not an ending. These things are never clean, never fully resolved in a single night. But the kind of beginning that builds a record, and records make future action possible. Marcus Reed stood to the side while this happened and did not say anything. He had said what needed to be said. Now it was somebody else's turn. Sheriff Bowen came to stand beside him. The two men watched in silence for a long moment. "The woman have somewhere safe to go tonight?" Bowen asked. "I don't know," Marcus said. "You'd have to ask her." Bowen nodded slowly. He was quiet for a beat. Then, "I may have come at this wrong." It was not a full apology. Marcus didn't expect one. What it was an acknowledgement, the recognition by a man who was used to being right that he had, in this particular instance, begun from a flawed premise. Marcus understood the value of that because it was harder than it sounded. "It's a reasonable mistake," Marcus said. "We don't look like what we are." Bowen glanced at him sidelong. "What are you?" Marcus thought about this for a moment. He thought about his father, Gerald Reed, who had come back from Vietnam in 1971 with 2 broken fingers that never healed right, and a distrust of institutions that never fully healed either, and who had built the Iron Ridge Riders not as an act of rebellion, but as an act of construction, the deliberate, careful building of something that could hold people together when nothing else would. He thought about the 60% of his chapter who had served, about Tommy Briggs and his 2 tours and his quiet way of sitting beside a frightened child as though it were the most natural thing in the world, about the man 3 bikes back who had lost a son to an overdose 2 years ago and who rode now because movement was the only thing that kept the grief from becoming unbearable. About the woman, one of 11 female members of the Tennessee chapter, who had left an abusive marriage 5 years ago and who had found, in the noise and wind and brotherhood of the road, something that functioned like freedom. "We're people," Marcus said finally, "same as anyone else." Bowen seemed to sit with that for a moment. Along the street, the Iron Ridge riders had begun the quiet, practiced process of departure. Helmets retrieved, conversations concluded, engines warming with the low, careful sound of machines being woken gently. There was no ceremony to it, no announcement, just the organic movement of a group of people who had done what they came to do, which was nothing they had planned, and everything that needed doing. Lily had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder. Janet stood near the cruiser, one hand resting on Lily's hair, talking quietly with Whitmore about what would happen next, about the report, the options, the resources available to her. She looked exhausted in the way that follows the relief of a fear becoming manageable, not resolved, but steadier than she had been an hour ago. Tommy was packing away his water bottle, leaning against his bike with his arms crossed, watching the scene with the particular watchfulness of someone who is ready to move if needed and calm if not. Marcus walked back to where Janet stood with Lily. "She going to be okay?" he asked, meaning both of them, but looking at the sleeping child. Janet looked at her daughter for a long moment. "She kept asking me, in the car. She kept asking if the men with the motorcycles were the good guys." She paused. "I told her yes." Marcus nodded. "I'm sorry she was scared," he said. "She wasn't scared," Janet said. "That's the thing." She looked at him with the direct, clear eyes of someone who has decided to say exactly what they mean. "She wasn't scared at all. She said the man with the grey beard sat down next to her, and after that she wasn't scared anymore." Marcus didn't say anything to that. He didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't sure there was anything to say. He put his helmet on. Before he mounted his bike, Sheriff Bowen appeared at his elbow. "Read," he said. Marcus turned. Bowen extended his hand. It was a precise gesture, deliberate, not casual, carrying the weight of everything that had gone unsaid between them. Marcus looked at it for one beat, then he took it. They shook hands on Maple Street in Millbrook, Tennessee, in the small hours of the morning, while a woman held her sleeping daughter and 300 motorcycle engines turned over one by one. "Safe travels," Bowen said. "Thank you, Sheriff." Marcus swung onto the Road King, felt the engine's heartbeat under him, that steady, reliable vibration that had been the one constant of his adult life. He looked down the long column of bikes, chrome and leather and ink, the faces of people he trusted with his life, and he felt, as he always did in this moment, the specific and complicated comfort of belonging to something real. He did not look back at the windows of Millbrook's houses, at the people who had watched the night from behind glass, and concluded what they concluded. He had spent 48 years not asking to be understood by people who preferred their conclusions to the truth. He wasn't going to start now. What he thought about, as he rolled forward and the column began to move, was a 7-year-old girl sitting on a curb in the dark with a rabbit named Benny, crying in that particular quiet way that meant she had stopped expecting anyone to come, and then someone came. That was the story. The whole story, in the end, was that simple, a person alone in the dark, and someone who stopped. Millbrook, Tennessee receded in his mirrors, the street lamps, the storefronts, the water tower with its faded name, and the road opened ahead of him, wide and dark, and entirely his, and Marcus Reed rode into the night with 300 brothers at his back, and the feeling that the world was, on balance, worth the trouble. Behind him, the sound of 300 engines merged into a single roar. It was, if you knew how to listen, something close to music. Lily Harmon, asleep in the back seat of her mother's Civic, did not hear it fade, but she would remember it for the rest of her life.